Right, welcome back to the Procurement Federal Acquisition Supplement and Defence Federal Acquisition Supplements Clauses podcast. I'm Eric Marquette here with Ruby Sturt and, of course, Paul Natopsky. Today we're unpacking the power of precedence in federal contracts, something that often sounds, well, a tad dry, until you're tangled in a contract dispute and wishing you'd paid closer attention.
Yeah, spot on, Eric. It's one of those things that seems like a hidden bit of legalese, but the FARD 52.215-8 Order of Precedence Clause is, honestly, your best mate when documents start arguing with each other. Paul, you're our in-house guru. What exactly is this clause, and why should anyone in federal procurement care?
Good question. So the Order of Precedence Clause, specifically for 52.215-8, gets inserted into nearly every negotiated contract because 415.204 lays out the format for these contracts, and 15.209 tells the contracting officer to put this clause in. Whenever there's a contradiction in your contract, it tells you exactly which piece of the contract wins. There's a pecking order. First comes the schedule, then representations and instructions. Next are the contract clauses. After that, attachments. And finally, technical specs. Strict hierarchy, no interpretation needed.
I always find it interesting how much is riding on that order. I mean, the schedule isn't your diary for the month. It's got the guts of the deal, like price, quantities, deliverables. So if there's a contradiction between the schedule and, let's say, an attachment, the schedule takes the crown. Paul, do you mind sharing that case you mentioned the other day with the Navy vessel and the mix-up in cybersecurity requirements?
Sure, Eric. On that program, the contract had a technical spec attachment that included outdated cybersecurity standards conflicting with what was actually written into the main schedule and clauses. The contractor's team got confused, thought they only needed to meet the specs requirements, but the prime pointed to the schedule and contract clauses, which incorporated current DFARS cybersecurity regulations. Since those sit higher in the order, the error was pretty clear. But that confusion caused weeks of delay and, frankly, could have turned into a dispute settlement if neither side knew the precedence rule. It emphasizes why you can't just skim over those sections. Order really does matter.
And it's so easy to do, right? I mean, you glance at an attachment and figure, oh, this must be the nuts and bolts. But really, it's the main body, the schedule, that's king. I reckon a lot of people skip straight to the bits they care about and get bitten later.
That's the trap, isn't it? If you're working contracts and you don't internalise that progression, schedule, representations, clauses, attachments, specs, you're just asking for trouble.
Exactly. And don't forget, this order's prescribed, so there's a uniform rule book, especially when stuff gets messy across the tiers of subcontracting. If everyone's on the same page, disputes don't spiral. They get solved with reference to the right place in the contract. No more, no less.
So, that brings us to the next headache. Negotiating your way out of a T&Cs standoff. You know, when the prime or a subcontractor clings to their own pet terms, even when those terms clearly don't fit federal requirements. Paul, how do these precedence rules help when you hit those negotiation deadlocks?
Right, this happens a lot. Let's say a prime wants to keep in a proprietary limitation on data use, or some commercial warranty term that doesn't line up with the flowdown requirements. You can leverage the order of precedence by pointing out that if those proprietary T's and C's aren't in the schedule or principal clauses, and they conflict with higher tier contract terms, then frankly, they're not enforceable. I've seen RFPs where a subcontractor pushes to strike language in an attachment that contradicts the DFARS cybersecurity clause higher up. Look, you say, even if this slip made it in, the DFARS clause governs. It's clear and objective. Less room for arguing, more for aligning.
Yeah, and sometimes I think the problem is that legalese, blimey, it just puts people off. I've used a bit of narrative storytelling, actually, when explaining all this to a team that glazed over in talks. Like, imagine your house rules get scribbled on a sticky note in the backyard, but your rental agreement says something else. Which one matters when there's a leak? Suddenly, everyone tunes in. That's probably a terrible analogy. Paul will fix me up if I'm off base, but it works for translating the flow down and precedence idea into normal speak.
No, I love that. It really does help to reframe it as a story, especially when people freeze up at page 13 of a contract. And if you can demystify order of precedence for them, suddenly you see the light bulbs go on. Oh, so that attachment doesn't overrule the main terms.
Definitely. I mean, simple metaphors work when you're stuck in the weeds. And to Ruby's point, if you build narratives around these examples, it sticks. That's why in negotiations, I always push teams to highlight the precedence hierarchy up front. That way, when you encounter those stubborn T's and C's, you can calmly point to the clause order and explain. This is how federal contracts resolve disputes about what governs. Frankly, it prevents a mountain of trouble. If people learned just this sequence, schedule, representations, clauses, then attachments and specs, half the deadlocks we see would melt away before they even started.
And it's not just about winning the argument either. Like, it builds trust. Your partners see you're working from a logical, standardized structure, not just making it up as you go. That's huge, especially for newbies trying to break into government contracting. Know the structure, and you're already way ahead.
Spot on, Ruby. And actually, that connects to what we've talked about in earlier episodes. If you remember in episode 1, we emphasized negotiation power and clear communication for subs. This is just one more tool for that toolbox. It's not just technical, it's practical negotiation leverage. So here's where we help folks actually apply the theory. Paul, how should contract managers and their teams use this order of precedence when they're facing a reluctant prime or stuck with dense bundles of requirements?
It starts with knowing the uniform contract format cold. Remember, parts 1 through 4, with the schedule at the top. When you're at the table and a prime drops a DFARS cybersecurity clause in an attachment that struggles against the main schedule, you cite the hierarchy. As per FAR 52215-8, the schedule governs. Walk them through part 1, see what's listed, then part 2 for clauses, and use that sequence to evaluate any potential conflicts. Sometimes just reciting the order diffuses the whole standoff. If it's bundled, but not in the right spot, it can't override what's in the schedule or clauses. That's how you get movement in negotiations.
And I reckon it gives people confidence too, If you can walk through the parts real step by step, it's not just, I think this is wrong. It's, look, here's the map and we're following it. It's almost like reading the recipe before arguing about what's for dinner. You show your logic and suddenly the whole room settles down.
Exactly, and it becomes less personal, more structural. So, Paul, when should a contractor decide to challenge or even escalate an inapplicable term and condition? When's it appropriate to just accept, and when's the right time to push back?
That's where judgment comes in, Eric. If a term is just sort of redundant but doesn't conflict, sometimes it's not worth the political capital to dig in. But if inapplicable T's and C's pose liability, compliance, or cybersecurity risks, that's when you point to precedence and push back, firmly but factually. If the prime's intransigent or the issue jeopardizes flow-down requirements, especially with something as critical as data security or government-furnished information, you escalate. The precedence clause is designed to protect not just the contractor, but the entire supply chain's legal integrity. It's there so each link knows what rules it's.
And that's what keeps the machine running, right? Avoids legal mayhem, keeps compliance practical, and gives even the small players a fair shot at negotiating through the jargon.
Couldn't agree more. If you want to operate effectively and negotiate with confidence, internalizing order of precedence is a must. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap for today. Hopefully we've given our listeners some tools to take to their next negotiation and maybe spared a few headaches.
Absolutely. Next episode, we'll dig deeper into contract modifications and what happens when the government changes requirements midstream. Until then, keep reading the fine print and stick to the hierarchy.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Eric, Paul, always a pleasure. See you blokes next time.
Thanks, Ruby. Thanks, Paul. Take care out there, and we'll catch you in the next one.